for the second time, for the second time ever, in the middle of a live, Facebook just crashes. I find that pretty convenient. Wait for everybody to roll back in here real quick. This is the second time ever that my Facebook Live has crashed. And conveniently, it's happened on the same day. How convenient. I'm going to wait a second for everybody else to roll back in here. I hope all is well in this this international pandemic. I hope all is well. Oh, no doubt, bro. I'm gonna wait about a minute for everybody to get back in here so we can continue where we left off at. Oh man, I've never had that happen. I've never had a situation where live has crashed on me in the middle of a conversation. 2 times in the same day. First time ever though. I just reset my phone. We'll see if that magically fixes it. All right. All right. So picking up where I left off. Hey guys, you remember when we were kids and we were in elementary school? You remember being in kindergarten and you learn basically how to tell where the boys and girls bathroom is, primary, secondary colors, letters, numbers. One thing that always stood out as odd to me, and I mean even as a 5-year-old, this stood out as odd to me. You learn all of these real basic things in kindergarten, right? Then they throw at you the concept fiction and nonfiction. As a kid, you remember Sesame Street? Someone out here is doing their own thing. You have all these concepts you're learning, but then you learn fiction and nonfiction. I always thought that was a bit out of place with everything else that we're taught. But as an adult, it came back to me. I came back to that remembrance of being in kindergarten and learning all these basic things, show and tell, and watching the little. For those who are '80s babies, you remember. Ooh, I want to turn the projector to get the turn when it beeps and all that. I know y'all remember that from the '80s. Fiction and nonfiction. They taught us very early on that something that is nonfiction is truth, and it is factual, and something that is fiction is fairy tale and made up. I know you guys recall this. So it's gonna seem like I'm jumping to another topic about it, but I'm about to connect it. For those who are in the computer field, for those who I went to high school with, we were magnet computer information programming. I went to school to be a programmer. I didn't go into that field directly because I'm a musician as well, but I still have the skill set to do it, and I understand logical expressions. The first thing they taught us in the computer field, when you're developing a computer program, you set conditions. You set environmental conditions by which the program will follow suit in a logical order by the conditions and parameters that you set. You set an environment. You set boundaries. You set limits. You set if and then statements. You set preconditions, right? Jamila, you know where I'm going with this. And so back to the fiction story for a second. If I wanted to program an environment by which I'm farming people to think a certain way, right? I might set a precondition like, hey, we're going to precondition you to understand that when something's not true, we call it fiction. When something is true, we call it nonfiction. So anytime you see something that we show you, that we title it, we're telling you what to think of it. So if I wanted to set a precondition like this, and I wanted to hide something from you, I would set a precondition, and then I would show you the truth, and just title it that it's a lie. And subconsciously, you would believe it. So if you're wondering why this seems like a movie, this whole situation that is going on, it's because you done seen 30 fiction movies about this. You've been shown over 2 or 3 decades about 30 movies about diseases running rampant, especially within the last 10. I did a whole post on this. You guys filled up my post with at least 30, 40 movies. Same narrative. I Am Legend, I, Robot. All these movies where, either a germ turns you into a virus, turns you into a zombie, or some virus runs amok. Do you remember back in 1994, what was it called? Outbreak? Like, we are pre-programmed that when they show us something on a television program, you are programmed to look at it a certain way. People are like, I feel like I'm in a movie. Yeah, because they showed you this in the movie. They just told you it wasn't real. So you wouldn't buy into the fact that it's actually coming. So, if you turn on CNN right now, it's like all those movies. It's like every movie we've ever seen about the topic. Everyone's the same thing. And so when you set a preconditioned environment, once said condition is activated or fulfilled, then a person is triggered. So they have triggered an emotional response out of people that we have been preconditioned to look at something as unreal, which makes it worse. Because in our minds, if we see something as being unreal and it happens, it actually makes it feel worse than what it actually is. Add the fact that they got people thinking that viruses can jump from one person to another. You breathe the same air, all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm infected. Get this. I go to the supermarket now. Not only do people have on masks, they don't even want to make eye contact with you. The news didn't even tell us that yet. If you make eye contact, the virus will jump from your eyes to theirs. Wouldn't surprise me the very least. We believe everything else we're told. The divine experts and guides that we never question tell us, and no one ever questions it. So this whole situation, it is a massive wake-up call on several ends. We've been taught to place faith in this system. And I'm hoping that this situation will wake people up to the idea that you don't need to put faith in man over your own ability to self-provision, see, think critically, reason, conclude. Like, how far are they going to go left with the foolishness that we're being told? Like, how dumb do they really think we are? If you look on the internet right now, you have nothing but videos of people going to hospitals. I went to hospital. I haven't put my video up yet, but I definitely went to the hospital. Looked around, empty. And I'm not saying that in certain areas you're not seeing this, whatever this is, that's making our cells toxic. I'm not saying that in certain areas it's not happening. What I'm saying is what they're telling us is making us say it ain't a virus. It's something creating cellular toxicity that is creating a virus response. The virus is being called in to damage control something that's creating the damage. We're not being told the source of the damage deliberately. And I do think it's cell poisoning. I totally agree with you. Because everything is pointing to it. And when you look at the facts and you look at everything centered around this situation, just look at the facts. Just use your mind, critical thinking, and look at the facts. Look at the facts. I've gotten to a point over the years where literally everything that we've ever been told, I ask myself now, where did that come from? Who came up with that? What was their bias? Was there an agenda? Do they look like me? Everything. Because it's funny how people, when I say certain things like this, people will come on my page arguing me, and I'm like, that's interesting. You don't ever take that much energy to question what you were told from strangers. You know me. You know me. I'm not a doctor. So obviously, and then I'm not a billionaire. I'm not making money out here trying to lie to you. What sense would it make for Mario, the ordinary guy, to just sit here and make things up and just spread falsehood? There's no motive in that for me. I don't get anything out of that. But a private panel of scientists who pretty much run the entire medical education system. They dictate what doctors do, say, and think. If you say something different than what they tell you, you get blackballed, who are backed by multinational businesses, multinational billionaires, the medical industrial complex, big pharma, big agriculture. They have something to gain or lose by lying to you. I don't. I don't. You know, so we started off this conversation 2 videos ago. For those who are just joining in, Facebook cut me off twice so far. You can go back and look at the other videos to kind of get the precursor of what we were talking about. I started this conversation because I'll post things and certain individuals will be like, Mario, you're not a doctor. You're not a medical expert. You don't have a PhD. I'm like, well, shoot, that makes me a little bit more qualified, quite frankly. Independent research makes me more qualified than someone and listen, I'm not demonizing people who have been educated by the system, because a lot of us don't know. We don't know that it isn't scientists across the board that are setting the standard for the education and for the medical standards. We don't know that in most cases. We don't know that it's a private board of scientists that pretty much run this whole show. We don't know that. I can't fault a medical professional who has a heart to want to help people, who want to see people do well, that genuinely has it in their heart to do well by people. I don't have a problem with you. You're a victim of the system just like we are. We all are. You know, and so when I was younger and I started looking into this, it disturbed me to find out that in most cases, I think maybe nurses have more nutrition experience in education than maybe even doctors. Understand, if you have a MD, you are trained to identify a symptom and prescribe pharma. That's what you're trained to do. You're not trained to address a root. You're trained to prescribe pharma. You're not trained to give someone herbs to have their body help itself. You're not trained to assist the body help itself. You're not trained to do that. You are trained to identify a symptom and prescribe medication. Pharma. And before 1910, medicine was considered an herb to help you heal yourself. Pharma is not medication. Pharma is molecularly molecular modified things. Unnaturally occurring things. For instance, for those who understand what patents are for. Patents are for the purpose of protecting the intellectual property of a said object. Either something that makes life easier, some sort of machine, some sort of fashion. Basically, you're protecting the intellectual property of an idea for the purpose of making money. Now, in order to patent something, it cannot be natural. It cannot be naturally occurring. No one can claim ownership to something naturally occurring. So, you could not make money off of herbs, not off of selling them. You might be able to make money off of growing them, but there's more money in sickness management than in health management. I'm going to say that again. There's more money that can be made in sickness management than in health management. Because if you actually teach humans to eat what they're supposed to, that the body can self-heal, and you educate people on how to take herbs and things to heal themselves, there's no subscription-based business. There's no health insurance industry. There's no monopolized health insurance industry. Fun fact for you, while we're on the subject. Did you know that in the medical industry, the reason health insurance companies are in place, it goes back to what we said in the last video. Someone created a problem, and then they came in as the swooping hero to provide a solution. Do you know that there's a privatized standard on the cost for services, for medical equipment, and everything is marked up, massively marked up. Like, you get like a medical cot for a hospital. Sucker costs like $10 to make. in the medical book, standardized, privatized, standardized book, that cot might be like $500. It's not what it costs. It's marked up so that the HMOs and the PPOs can come in and say, hey, we can offer you a discount if you come through us for our network of doctors. Lo and behold, it's marked up so they can get their piece off of it. You know, there are doctors out here where if you call the doctor's office and you say, hey, what is your out-of-pocket cost? Some doctors are actually ethical enough to say, you know what? You're paying out of pocket. You don't have health insurance. I'm not going to charge you the marked up rate, knowing that it's not even ethical to overcharge you for something that you can barely afford now. So here is my out-of-pocket cost, and here is the insurance cost. The insurance cost is marked up so that the insurance companies can make their money. That's why everything's so high. It's not high just because it costs a lot. It's high because the same private groups. All of this is about money, people. Venture capitalists, big pharma, big agriculture. The FDA is a massive conflict of interest. How do you put the food that is getting people sick in the drugs that cure them in the same administration? That's a conflict of interest. If they did what they were supposed to do, you should have a food administration and a drug administration separately so they can check and balance each other. How do you put them in the same administration? Ethically. How do you do that? Do you know that, for those who are old enough to remember Clarence Thomas, with the whole Anita Hill thing back in it's either the late 80s or early 90s. Clarence Thomas was, if I'm not mistaken, he was an attorney. He was a big attorney for Monsanto. For those who know who Monsanto is, with the seed saving and the seed monopoly that they have over certain seeds that you can sow in the ground. They're big corporate bullies, by the way. But he was an attorney for Monsanto. So this dude gets a promotion. Clarence Thomas we're talking about here. He was defending at one point. He was a defense attorney for Monsanto. This dude ended up being on the chairboard of the FDA. How do you go from defending Monsanto from scrutiny of the FDA to being on the chairboard of the FDA? Now get this. After that, he ended up being an attorney again for Monsanto. Do you see the corruption in that? This whole system is predicated on making money for the powers to be. So, bringing everything back to one accord. You got a private panel of scientists that set the standard for everything medically that we look at, understand, measure, whether you are a medical professional, whether you're a doctor, set the standard. Scientists outside of their little circle of trust can't question, can't reproof, can't challenge, none of that. It is set in stone. They happen to be backed by multinational billionaires, multinational businesses, big pharma, big agriculture. Basically a lot of money that says, hey, we're giving you a lot of money to make sure you set the standard on what is considered scientifically sound, whether it's scientifically sound or not. Kind of like what Coca-Cola did in the 80s, in the late 80s, where they paid all these propagandists to come in and say, hey, we're going to run all these ads that, sugar's not as unhealthy as people think it is. Why? Because the scientists were telling you sugar is the #1 killer in America. So they had to PR and damage control that through PR, through propaganda. This is what we live in. So you find out that a virus is not contagious and that it's self-produced in the body and that it is the result of cellular toxicity. You find out that in mass. Bye-bye pandemic. Bye-bye keeping everybody in the houses. Bye-bye certain technologies with higher radiation and higher electromagnetic shifts. Bye-bye all of that. Bye-bye control system. You can't control people that you cannot keep in fear. This is all about keeping us in fear. I'm not saying people are not dying out here. What I'm saying is we're being told about the cause of cellular toxicity. We're not being told. And the virus is being self-produced in the body to damage control something that we're not being told is affecting us. But they also know that so as long as the mass majority buy into this foolishness and continue to drink the Kool-Aid, they got us. Because it is at a point where the ignorant will actually fight you for not buying into the narrative. And I'm pretty sure many of you have come across this, where if you try to question something that the media says, your own family members, oh my God, you're so reckless. You're going outside. Oh my God, you're going to contaminate other people. Really? Am I? What happened to kids don't get this? What happened to that? Perhaps kids have not been exposed to radiation and electromagnetic, unnaturally occurring things long enough to experience cellular toxicity where viruses are trying to jettison said toxins from the body. Maybe that's it. But we forgot that part. We forgot kids don't get this as often. We forgot only people with compromised immune systems don't get this. It's funny that they're literally saying the same thing over and over again, sprinkling more components of fear into it. And the same narrative is actually getting people more and more scared. They just keep saying the same thing over and over again. And it's like it's seeping in more and more. And people are responding more and more extreme to the exact same thing that they've been saying from day one. It's a pandemic. People with compromised immune systems are getting sick and dying, some of them, in their older years. They've been saying the same thing from the beginning. But what are we saying when we go out? More and more extremities, right? So here's where I think we're headed with all of this. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. You got Bill Gates Sr. talking about population control and how we need, we're projected to get to a point where it's unsustainable because these rich guys don't want to come up off their money and resources to actually share. That's the reason. If we have population issues, it's because 1% is controlling everything. If you shared and tore down your capitalism and actually built a utopia built on fair and reasonable things, wouldn't be in this situation. But you're smart, you're the god, so to speak. So conveniently, we need to control population. That's the narrative. We need to control the reproductive services, as Bill Gates Jr. says. So here's what I believe. Don't take it to the bank. This is Mario looking at all the facts, looking at all the information, having done some research. Here's what I'm thinking. The powers that be know that lower levels of electromagnetic disturbance, it causes some sterility and infertility. Some at lower levels. I believe Wuhan was a test phase. I believe Wuhan was a test phase for something that they plan on being rolled out by 2030. I believe the goal by 2030 is for them to have an international standard where you are RFID chipped. That RFID technology can track you. It has a MAC address. It is connected to a network. It has real-time access to your vitals. It has GPS location ability. And it has a unique identifier where they will know who you are. They will have running, the goal is to have running inventory on every human on Earth. And attach that to vaccines. And attach that to human spending trends. Why? Nathan Rothschild once said, Mr. Bowerberg once said, I care not who controls a nation, so as long as I control a nation's money, cash flow. But you cannot control a cash flow that you cannot see. There are certain cultures in America, which I'm not going to air them out on social media, but there are certain cultures in America where they do not believe in bank accounts as a culture, as a people. So they are completely off the grid if you wanted to be able to capture, data mine, manage their spending trend and their cash flow. It's almost like when you go to the supermarket. You think they're just giving you a discount with your phone number just because they're good Samaritans? No, they're getting a survey to recognize your spending trends across the whole with a whole group of people, so they know what products they're marketing well, which ones they're not, and which ones they need to jack the price up on because they know you want it. It's metadata, just like anything else. And so for them, this is about expanding context, knowing that the bigger the context, the more they understand the things within inside the context, meaning us. I do believe that they're going to try to create this system by 2030 where you have to be vaccinated to travel. You have to be vaccinated to pretty much do anything. They already have a lower standard of that now in order to send your kids to school. I believe the end game is to roll out a network which really does allow them to manage and monetize all of this. But more importantly, they know that higher EM fields create a less likelihood for you to be able to reproduce. Now, it makes sense that they would test phase this in China because China already has a one-child regulation anyway. China is already like the father of, we want to prevent you from having more than one kid because we're trying to control the population. So for them to hypothetically sign on to be a test phase city wouldn't surprise me at all. On top of that, a lot of people don't know that they gave a nano vaccine, call it Smart Dust, look it up, the month leading up to them activating that 60 gigahertz network. And for those that don't understand, their 5G in China is probably more equivalent to 7G here in America. They are 20 years ahead of us in technology. There is nothing remotely similar between what they're doing and what we're doing outside of the technology itself. How they're using it, they're decades ahead. So it would make sense that they would go to the culture who is already ahead of the world on the technology to test phase it. Why not? In the process, they knew what it was going to do. See, their scientific panelists, or their scientific panel, they're not ignorant. They're just paid to control what is said. They know this stuff. They know the effects this stuff would have. They know. It's already been scientifically established. They know higher EM fields produce these flu-like symptoms, which are really the viruses in your body trying to move toxicity out of your body. They know this stuff. You know how they know this stuff? Look at radiation therapy in cancer patients. They know all the side effects of extreme radiation and extreme EM. They know it already. It is a scientific established fact. So I believe Wuhan was a triple benefit for them. They needed to crash the economy. Pelosi overnight rolls out this 10,000 page digital dollar bill. For those who actually watch Congress and watch C-SPAN, these people can't even agree on a Friday beyond 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to sign off on a bill under the guise that they want to be home with their families by Friday night. Lo and behold, Pelosi over the weekend rolls out a 10,000 page bill for a digital dollar. No, that was sitting around waiting. They had that waiting for us. They just needed the situation. In the financial sector, we already knew within the last year that they were going to crash the market. Quantitative easing. They already said they were going to do it. We just didn't know how. This is a new method of crashing the market. The last time was the bubble burst with the housing market in 2008. They can't keep doing the same thing because people are going to catch on eventually. But for those in the industry, you know quantitative easing is, hey, we're going to do something to leverage the market to crash it. Then we're going to lower interest rates to come in and seem like the central bank is swooping in as the heroes to save everybody. It's like what narcissists do. They just take you up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down to control the narrative, to keep you in a state of chaos so they can control you. So these are a bunch of billionaire narcissists doing all of this, who happen to have some smart guys on their payroll. That's what we're dealing with here. And so I heard today that the Attorney General is pushing for them to suspend the Constitution, which is a bit scary for those who understands what that means. All of your protections will be suspended. You have no American protections. And I'm not here to scare anybody. This is not about fear-mongering or none of that. It's really not. I believe in God, and I believe that God is my keeper, so I'm not concerned about any of this. But you keep your eyes open and you know what to pray for. You know how to protect your family. It's both. It doesn't have to be one extreme to the next. It doesn't have to be, if you believe in God, then just walk with your eyes closed. There's nothing in Scripture that says that. you do have to take the steps in faith, which means you have to actually move, which means it would be beneficial to keep your eyes open in the process. It just means you're not supposed to operate in fear along the way. So yeah, I personally believe that Wuhan was a test phase. On the news, they keep saying that this is some sort of exercise. They put it right in front of you. Oh yeah, this exercise. They just keep saying that, and people are just not listening. They say it right in front of you. This is an exercise. I believe this is an international military exercise. This is just phase one. It would not surprise me if they do suspend the Constitution and then they start closing food stores, which would make sense that they have the National Guard on standby right now, waiting for the civil unrest that they're trying to create. Wouldn't surprise me, because I believe that's a possibility. There's a book by a gentleman named William Cooper. He wrote in the late 80s, early 90s called Behold a Pale White Horse, where he talks about all of this. My mother read it when I was a kid, and she taught me pretty much everything that she read when I was a kid. So none of this catches me off guard. I'm not surprised by any of this. One of the things mentioned in the book was test shocking, where they will create these PTSD-like events in order to shock the public. And then they use analytics now to measure the response of the shock. People, they've been measuring human behavior. The great minds that were studying this came from Austria and Germany during World War II. They were given safe passage after World War II under the guise of Operation Paperclip to continue their research in America after World War II. Half of them went to the CIA. Half of them went to Hollywood. Listen to what I'm saying now. People who were studying the human mind, human psychology, human behavior, what makes us tick, what makes us think, what can control us, how our schools of thought are formed, how our preferences are shaped, what we're scared of, how we're indoctrinated to be fearful. The ones that were studying this, the greatest minds in the world at the time, were under the Nazi regime. They were given safe passage after World War II under Operation Paperclip. Look it up. Half of them went to Hollywood. Half of them went to the CIA. Do the math with that for a second. And so they are no strangers to the human mind. In fact, they've been measuring and collecting data on us. Big data is not new. We just didn't have a commercialized engine to make sense of it. But they've been collecting data and querying and doing all these things to try to understand human pattern for years. There was one time I had out here in Texas, I had a Lyft ride. Picked the guy up from the airport. He was professionally dressed. And I just have conversations with my rides to pick their minds. Lo and behold, this guy works for the federal government in the data mining department, dealing with farming data. Now, your boy ain't no dummy, and I've been around the block. I have some understanding in analytics, in human psychology. I understand the construct and the context by which all this stuff operates. And I'm just talking to the gentleman, and a lot of times I play dumb because I don't want to reveal how much I know, but I deliberately threw a word out there. I just wanted to see his response. I was test shocking him. I was like, yeah, something, the hive. He was like, that word, what did you just say? I said, the hive. He said, how do you know about that? He was like appalled. He was appalled that I knew that word because I know what it represents. And it's not supposed to be common knowledge to know that they're data farming in order to create a hive thinking. What they're trying to do with this metadata and with the analytics long term is to funnel human behavior down to a point that they can just activate you through some media, through a situation. They're trying to create an analytical algorithm, this masterful algorithm that can basically allow them to promote hive thinking, which is what they've done since kindergarten. When you look at what school's measuring, Thomas Jefferson is noted as saying, let's create a compulsory schooling system so that we can pull a couple geniuses from the rubbish. School was never about making you smart to be a millionaire like them. In fact, quite frankly, we'll never be millionaires unless we're in capital investments. Can't make any money, real money, unless you're doing certain things in investments. They know that. It's taxed differently. It's not taxed the same. They get all the breaks. But the reality of the situation is school was set up in order to measure and grade intellectual conformity, intellectual subordinates, not to see how smart you are. Why do you think the school doesn't give you an IQ test? And even an IQ test isn't foolproof, because there's a type of intelligence called EQ, which deals with emotional intelligence, which is why the Chinese run circles around Americans, because they teach their kids to be emotionally intelligent before they start to establish IQ, so that they don't have emotional impairments that prevent them from being intelligent. But we're graded based on crystalline intelligence, our ability to memorize and regurgitate what we're told to think and memorize. That's what school's grading. And so the whole system is set up to farm. It's a farming system. It'd be like if we were cattle and you sent the cows to school to learn how to properly maneuver through the farm to be milked. But the cows are being told, yeah, you go to cow school so that you can become a farmer. No, you're not. No, you're not. You're sent to cow school to be a good little cow. So the system is set up to farm and to funnel our schools of thinking. It is to make a nation of workers, because America is a business of managing businesses. We are the businesses. We are like the stores in the mall. The mall is controlled by the mall owner. We don't own the mall. We're just a store in the mall that has to pay to the mall owner. That's what we are. We're just sent to school to taught how to run our little shop in the mall. So yeah, this whole thing is about cattle management. So it doesn't surprise me that by 2030 they want a head count. They're doing the stimulus and they do the census anyway to do that anyway. But they realize that there are enough people that don't fill out census. There are enough people who spend money paper only, off grid. We need to come up with a system that we can kill the dollar to force everyone digital so we can see everything, and make everyone report to us so that we know who everyone is, where everyone is, the head count, so we can determine if we're going to do this population control thing, what we're dealing with. Anybody who works in retail knows one of the most important things is managing inventory, managing the consumption, and any shipments that you receive. You have to keep up with inventory. You have to know what you have around you at all times. You have to know that if you're running a business. If they're running a business, they haven't been good at keeping inventory, and so they're trying to improve it. So they got to kill the economy, get rid of paper dollars, which has absolutely nothing to do with the virus, by the way, but they're going to make it have something to do with the dollar because people don't think for themselves. And then they'll have their little management system set up. Then you're going to have Bill Gates spearhead. It's like a script. Bill Gates is going to spearhead. Oh, you're not going to be able to travel without a vaccine. You're not going to be able to go to school without a vaccine. When you get pulled over, the police are going to be like, let me see your driver's license, registration, and vaccine record. Like, it's like a script. If you know what I know, you see it's coming. It's coming. It's coming. They've scared enough Americans right now where they can pull it off. They've scared enough people. So what are your thoughts, guys? I've been rambling. What are your thoughts on this whole situation? Some of my friends are very woke. I hate the term, but it's relevant here. Some of my friends are very woke. So for some of you guys, this is new information. For some of you, it'll be like, oh, Mario, you're not a medical professional. All right, I'm not. And I'm glad I'm not. Not because I don't have any respect for those who have a heart to help people, but because at this point, as far as I'm concerned, having a PhD that tells you that having a PhD or degree that tells you that you have to keep your mouth shut, you can't think for yourself, you can't be innovative, you can't challenge what you've been taught, it's useless as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not saying education is useless. I'm saying if you have a degree that does not allow you to challenge the information, to reproof, to grow, and you have to sit back and just do what you're told, it's worthless as far as I'm concerned. That's my personal opinion. It's my personal opinion. Big hearts to those who go out here every day in the medical industry, and they're doing their very best to, within their education and their knowledge, to help the sick. This is no shot at you at all. This is absolutely no shot at you. For what it's worth, you're doing what you can in a system that doesn't allow you to do as much as you probably could, truth be told. In a system that's designed to see us fail because of what it wants to do with us, outside of our own devices and our own viewing of it. So, thoughts, people? What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? What are you thinking? What are you hearing? What's going on? This is, look. I was telling my girl today that I've kind of pulled back from what we consider to be amenity here in the States. Over the course of the past 10 years, I've just kind of pulled back. I don't really indulge a lot of the things that I did when I was younger. Not because I can't. I just honestly lost the interest in a lot of it, because when you really strip down society and think about what is really valuable, a lot of these things that we're taught to be valuable are not. And I got to a point where about 10 years ago, I started to pull myself back. Now, I love my football, and there are a couple things that are exception to the rule, but I'm not like losing my mind if we don't have the NFL this year or something. It's just this situation has not been as much of a shell shock to me, only because I started to sort of pull back from the amenities we're given to make this system attractive. Now, if this was 10, 15 years ago, when I was fully immersed, I'd probably be scared out of my mind right now. It'd be a culture shock. I'd be fighting to hold on to whatever they're telling me, hoping that it's that and not something else. Because I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of people that are arguing with me on my post, they're not really arguing with me personally, and I don't take it personal. They're fighting to hold on to a narrative that explains the situation that will allow them to hold on to everything that they consider to be normal up to this point. Not considering that tomorrow is never guaranteed to be as normal as the day before. We just assumed because we've seen day after day of it. It was never guaranteed. We were just blessed in the moment. And we're blessed in this moment. But what we're taught is a blessing, and what actually is may not be the same thing. And that's where I'm going with this. Just to go godly for a second with this. For me, if this is nothing else, this is a stripping down of placing your faith in men and a man's amenity. This is God silencing the spiritual noise around you, the carnality around you, for you to sit still long enough to sit in your thoughts and really strip down to think about what's really important. For anyone who's ever really been through anything, you know that God speaks to you the loudest when you have been humbled and stripped down to nothing. I've had more friends that used to scoff and argue with me over things of the Bible in the past who within the last 2 weeks have hit my inbox and said, you know what, Mario, maybe I need to look into these things that you've been talking about outside of what we're taught in Sunday church. God wastes nothing. Nothing that's done in the earth is wasted. It all serves the purpose that it serves. It's all written. 1 John 5, 7, and 8. There are 3 that bear record in heaven. 8 says there are 3 that bear witness in the earth. All of this has been written. We're here to play our part in the history of it and witness it. God wastes nothing. All of this is actually written in Revelations 9. The vaccines, all of that's written. It's written in Revelations 9. The Holy Spirit will reveal it to you through fasting and prayer. But all of this is written. This situation is written in Revelations 9. The point with the mark of the beast, the chipping on, that's Revelations 13. All of this is written. This is not anything new. My mother taught me this stuff as a child. And it was scary as a kid, you know. But when you know whose you are, you know that Scripture tells you that you'll be fine through any of this. Listen. Scripture says that a third will fall victim to these vaccines when it's said and done. And the reason the third will fall victim to these vaccines is because they have the type of fear they're not supposed to have. And so through that fear, they submit to this system. You're not supposed to fear any man. You're not supposed to fear any man, any man-made circumstance. Your healthy reverence, your healthy fear is supposed to be in the Most High. And through that and that obedience, that faith and that works, nothing can touch you. So understand, I'm not saying any of these things to scare anybody. I'll speak the truth because it's the truth. But if you have the fullness of understanding, you can speak this, you can know this, and you can be perfectly secure that through any of this, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. The funny part was, or is and was, the Most High was always in control. Just because we thought we were allowed to think that we were up to now. That just was what it was. So if nothing else, this should be eye-opening. And Scripture makes it very clear. After the smoke clears from this exercise, a large majority of us will resume to things like it never happened. And a small remnant of us will be like, you know what? Let me stick with what I know. Let me stick with God and keeping obedience to the laws and commandments as I know, and I'm going to stick to it. But many will revert back, like it never happened. That's written as well, you know. And so, we'll be all right. We will be just fine. And now I'm speaking to my black folk. Black folk, we done been through hell and high water. We have a history of displaying ingenuity in the most extreme of circumstances. We've made something from nothing as a people throughout our history. And I'm talking before 1600 up to now. For many of us, this is a walk in the park. People talking about, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent next week. Welcome to being in a lot of these black communities for a week. You'll be all right. For many of us, this is strap on the boots. We've done it. We've been there before. We are a resilient people. We are circumstantially and through the fire, we have been hardened to be familiar with struggle, to be able to create our way out of anything. We've always been that people. It's nothing new. If there's anyone that should not be worried, it's us. If there's anything that this situation will show anybody, it is the value of the resilience of our situation throughout our history. Don't regret the history. It had to happen, and you actually benefited from it. It ain't going to be black folk jumping in front of trains when their investments fail. A lot of us came from nothing. And a lot of us are not strangers to where we came from. A lot of us have not forgotten where we have come from. So if there's anyone that should not be fearful, or that should not be fearful, it's us. And it's not taking anything from anybody else. I'm just speaking to you right now. We'll be fine. With everything that I know, I'm not scared. Some people will be like, oh, Mario, I wish I didn't know because it scares me. And I'm like, I know and it doesn't. Because when you know whose you are, it's not going to scare you. The Bible says watch and pray. Keep your eyes open. God has you. Closing your eyes ain't going to change nothing. It's not, fear is a choice. Emotion's a choice. Now, sometimes it's not as easy as others, but when you experience anything in life, you experience it, you place an interpretation on that experience, and based on the interpretation you place on that experience, you choose the emotion that you attach. So for many, I'm with the Gathering of Christ Church. With many of us, we celebrate these moments because we see that prophecy is forwarding. We know what's on the other side of it because we're taught. Now, it's not that we're celebrating the demise of anyone. It's not that sort of a scenario. So, I had an atheist one time like, Mario, if God loves mankind so much, why does bad things happen to people? Well, you have to understand, this is not a single generational thing. The same reason African Americans have faced the plight of our forefathers having transgressed the laws of our covenant, and it was forewarned that if they violated the covenant, their sons and daughters would wake up on a continent that their mothers and fathers never knew, worshiping in traditions that their parents did not know, not knowing who they are, having been taken there on ships. This is not a single generation thing. It never was. It was never about us as individuals. This is about bloodlines across hundreds of years and generations. And this is about a very simple narrative. Two type of people on the earth. People who have a family tradition of being obedient to the Most High, and people who have a tradition separate from that. It's been that simple since the very beginning. You operate in a family that has a tradition, obedient to the Most High, like Adam, like Seth, like Methuselah, like Enoch, like Noah, like Shem, like Abraham, like Isaac, like Jacob, like Moses, like Christ. Or you are of bloodlines that, for whatever reason, have traditions outside of that. And it's your choice. At this point, it's your choice. And if there's any question, black folk, as to who we are in the earth, ask yourself why in America 70% of the churches have black folk in them. Ask yourself why when we get in the jam, we revert back to our God. That's not something new. It's etched into our DNA because of who we forgot that we were. Black folk, ask yourself, when you transgress the commandments, why do you seem to get hit over the head when other groups of people can do the same thing and nothing seems to happen to them? Maybe because you're under a covenant that they're not. Who told you who you were when you got here? Was it the same ones that stripped your identity from day one? Who told you who you were? And why don't they ever tell you who you are before 1600? Is it because you just poofed out of thin air and folk just found you and said, oh, look, we just found a new race of people. We're just going to put them into slavery. Or was this promised for the iniquity of our forefathers, and we're playing out history, where it said 2,000 years after the death of Christ, there would be a great awakening. And those who have forgotten who they are would start to remember. Who are the only people on the earth that don't know who they are? We call ourselves two continents, African American. That is about as vague an identity as it comes. Or we're black. We've taken on a vague identity which points to nothing. Who taught us to do that? Did they look like you and I? Who told us our family history? Do they look like you and I? Who teaches black history in school? Who's at the top of that education system? Do they look like you and I? You have time now to ask yourself these questions. The world is not blaring by right now. The world is not a distraction right now, outside of the fear mongering that we're seeing in the news. If you're into that sort of thing, I personally, I'm not into, I call it PTSD media, because that's what it is. It's designed to create post-traumatic stress and all these other. I'm not into it. But you have time to ask yourself these questions now. Black folk, you're being strengthened for something. You're being prepared for something. There's a book that you're not told that is your family history that speaks of this situation and tells you that you are being prepared through fire for something pursuant to our generations in front of us. Our history record tells us that when the bloodlines that are currently running this show have their power stripped, it'll be on the back of those who have forgotten who they are returning to their covenant. Because the only reason we lost our authority in the earth was because we stopped keeping our covenant. And our records tell us that the Most High allowed the stranger outside of our families to rise above us because of that iniquity. And that is literally the only way that we return to our place of scriptural authorship and authority to be a light to all people and all nations. But we can't do that until we as a whole return to our laws. And the powers to be know our scriptures, so they know the only way they keep power is by keeping us in a state of breaking our laws. They can break the laws. They're not under the covenant. We are. This is why all of our entertainment centers are centered around inspiring people to break God's laws. And nobody should, but if you're under the covenant, it stings a little bit more. If you are one of the bloodlines dating back to the covenant and you break the law, it's going to sting you a little harder than someone outside of that bloodline. And this is not saying that any one person's better than another by bloodline. This is not the narrative that I'm painting here. I'm saying that there's a reason why you are called African American as opposed to what you actually are. And you're starting to remember. And that's why all of these events must happen. That's why there needs to be an inventory. That's why there needs to be identification now. Think about it like this for a second. I'm half and half. I'm Roman and African American, for lack of a better term. I always wondered, being half and half, it gives you the ability to see things a little bit differently because you can see both sides of the narrative. But I've always wondered, why is it that we believe that the powers to be think that they're better than us? I'm a roll down that road for a second. Say I see a dog walking down the street, and in my mind, I'm like, you're a dog. I'm better than you. There's nothing that you can do to prevent me from being successful in doing what I need to do in the world. Am I caging that dog up? Am I putting that dog in a cage, and then putting that cage in a cage, and then putting that cage in a cage, and then putting that cage in a cage? If that dog was truly no threat to me, why would I work so hard to reinforce the environment by which that dog operates if I think I'm better than the dog? It occurred to me at one point. Us believing, us being fed a narrative that they think that they're better than us, it inspires Napoleonic response. It activates this desire, this subconscious desire in us to say, I'm going to prove them wrong, that I can show them that I can be as successful in their system as they can. And when I say they, let me clarify, because I got people of all races watching this video. I'm not talking about white people. So let me make that clear. There's a difference between talking about white people as a whole and talking about a set apart bloodline who happen to be white, who happen to be oppressing us and white folk too. So I want to make the separation there. When I say they, and so the racial narrative that we're given is smoke and mirrors. It's to keep us fighting common white folk. And common white folk, in a lot of cases, they don't see our side of it, but the system is set up so they can. So what would happen, black folk, if we were in a situation where, hypothetically speaking, white folk dealt with something that we never personally experienced because the system would not allow us to experience it in order to relate to them? They would come to us complaining about something, and we look at them like, what are you talking about? That don't happen. Just because it doesn't happen to us doesn't mean it doesn't happen to them. The same thing is on the flip. In a lot of cases, they're dealing with a situation the system set them up to not be able to have insight into what we're dealing with, to keep a divide and conquer mechanism in place. But then at the same time that they got the divide and conquer in place, they're force feeding us one thing and force feeding them something else, and we're fighting each other. The whole time you have these elite bloodlines who care nothing about racial anything. It's about their bloodline preservation. And they're basically playing both of us against each other. So I had a billionaire tell me recently, and I talked about this. Billionaire. He told me in this car ride, he was like, I get paid millions of dollars to provide wealthy people with context. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? We got on the subject of perception being reality to the person perceiving it. We got on that subject for a second. The notion that you have your own reality. And based on how you see the world uniquely, you're looking through that lens. And no two people look through the world with the exact same lens. He said to me, he was like, there are 6.8 billion truths in the earth. He's like, everyone has a truth, but it doesn't make it true. It's just true to them. The difference of whether their truth lines up with what is actually happening depends on the context and their access to it. He gave an example. He said, as a billionaire, poor people tell me all the time, I think you're just selfish and you don't want to help people. He's like, that is their truth. He's like, but that's not the truth. He's like, because a lot of wealthy people give millions of dollars. He's like, in fact, no one's complaining about these multi-billion-dollar companies like Google and Microsoft that don't pay a dime in taxes. But what stuck of the things that he talked to me about? Here's what stuck. He gave me an analogy. He said, imagine context is this. Imagine this is context. This container. He said, imagine you had a gallon of content. Content being the things that you see. The things around you that you constantly are recording and seeing. He's like, imagine you had a gallon of that, but only a container this size of context. He said, imagine that you can only make sense of the content that can fit inside of this container. He's like, now imagine the amount of content that you cannot make sense of that is right in front of your face. He said that's the issue in the world. He's like, your ordinary person is deliberately not given the context by which to understand the things that are happening around them. It's very powerful. And that's not by chance, that's by design. That's what propaganda is. It's a false context of what you're looking at. You look at something right in front of you, and it's a false context. And you're making false understandings and conclusions of the content. I.e., virus. Virus is a living organism that can jump from one person to another it's contagious. False context. A virus moves toxins from a cell to your lymphatic system and then dissipates. And happens to get you sick along the way until it removes all the toxins. Proper context. Now when you hear the content, it sounds like a lie when people tell, oh my God, this is so contagious. We need to shut down the government. If you have the right context, it's foolishness. If you have the context they fed you, it's hysteria. We live in a society which is socioeconomically controlled to produce a context in order to foot whatever the agenda is of its authors. And the authors do not look like you and I. They do not live like you and I. They do not have the same concerns as you and I. They do not have the same priorities as you and I. And just like Bill Gates talking about depopulation, his kids are not part of that. I can guarantee you his kids are not taking lotto tickets to determine whether their offsprings are going to survive. So they are very much biased to whatever their agenda is. And that agenda may or may not include you. And I'm not just saying black folk either. I'm saying across the board. So it is vitally important that you take as much time as possible while we're here breathing, living, whatever, to broaden your context and to ensure that the authors by which you subscribe to are actually providing real concrete context. You can do so by moving further and further away from money. Authors who are, the further an author is away from money, the higher the likelihood that their bias cannot, or their understandings were not bought, were not skewed, were not based on some motivations outside of self-preservation and the welfare of humanity. The ones that actually have the truth, who have done the scientific research, the ones that are honest, they live like you and I, white folk, black folk. They share our concerns for survival. They are constantly attacked by the mega rich. They are constantly shunned by the scientific panel that runs this show. The real truth, it will never be marketed. So if you're going to a marketed truth, you're probably not dealing with the right, you're not dealing with context at all. The context you're dealing with is a false lens, that it has an agenda to shape your public opinion to think and reason a certain way. Start asking questions, people. Turn off that news. Turn off mainstream media. Question everything. Ask where the authorship comes from. Has it ever occurred to you that when you watch national news, sources are telling us, we're just getting new reports that this expert tells us that? They don't ever back their sources. We just blindly assume because we've been programmed to think if it's news, it's credible. Our news is backed by multi-billion-dollar interests. Might be a little biased, you know? So I hope everyone's doing well in this situation. I'm calm. Nothing to be hysterical about if you have the right context, in and outside of God. Stay prayed up. Take this time to self-reflect and to think about some of the things said here today. If you have any questions about anything that I've spoken to, inbox me. Let's have a conversation. We got plenty of time to talk right now. But if a situation like this doesn't afford us anything, it affords us the opportunity to sit alone quietly, long enough to sit with our thoughts to realize critical thinking is valuable. Questioning things is valuable. Thinking for ourselves is valuable. Trusting the experiences of people we actually know is valuable. Something to think about. I hope everyone is well. I hope everyone is praying and staying cool and collective in this situation. Keep your eyes and ears open. And until next time. Shalom.